In recent years, video games that were derived from Norse mythology have gotten more attention in the gaming community. Games such as Skyrim, God of War, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, to name a few. The stories about the Nordic gods like Odin, Thor, and Loki are now as interesting as the pantheon of Greek gods. But there was another video game franchise that tackled some aspects of Norse mythology. Not necessarily the Nordic gods themselves are the focus, but rather the maiden warriors of Valhalla. The Valkyries, seekers of worthy mortals to be chosen to fight under Odin's command as Ragnarok approaches. In this Jho-RPG review, we will take a closer look on one of the Valkyries. The game is Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria for the PlayStation 2. The first Valkyrie Profile was released for the PlayStation 1 on December 1999 in Japan and August 2000 in America. It was developed by Tri-Ace, the same company that came up with the Star Ocean franchise, and published by Enix. The game was such a commercial and critical success due to its innovative gameplay and a not-so-familiar storyline that differs from most JRPGs. After the merger, Square Enix took the helm and published the second game called Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria on the summer of 2006 for the PlayStation 2. Tri-Ace again developed the second game as a successor to the first. Though the storyline of the second game was set a century before the events of the first, which makes this game technically a prequel, almost every aspect of the first game were used to make it more somewhat familiar with returning players. A good aspect of this game is how the story is being told. Unlike most JRPGs where you read a lot of text and expositions by talking to a lot of NPCs, the story advances by the use of full motion videos, each with good voice acting. The character designs, voices, and movement in each FMV are pretty good for a PS2 game. That they don't distract you from watching, listening, and reading on what's going on. For those who played the PS1 game, you will see some familiar faces being included in the game, which adds to the mystique of the overall plot moving forward. The music and sounds of this game are very reminiscent of other Tri-Ace JRPGs like Star Ocean, which is an awesome plus as well. The game starts you off with a full motion video about the title character, Silmeria Valkyrie, who was trying to escape Asgard. Out of the 3 Valkyries that Asgard has, only one should be awakened for every generation to deliver mortal souls to fight for Odin. When it was Silmeria's turn, she disobeyed Odin for reasons not fully explained. Hence, her soul was sent to slumber within Alicia, a teenage princess of an island nation in Midgard. Silmeria's soul suddenly awakens inside the girl, and now Alicia has 2 personalities. Her father, the king, thought that she was insane, so he secretly exiled her off to the countryside. But Silmeria and Alicia also discovered that the kingdom plans to start a rebellion against Odin. Now, it is up to Silmeria and Alicia to do whatever it takes to stop the impending war and ruin between Asgard and Midgard. At the same time, Odin is trying to preserve the status quo by retrieving the rogue Valkyrie by any means necessary.
Odin would like them transferred.
Unlike the PS1 game where you have the liberty flying across the world to go to your next destination, the overworld map in this game is just a topographical representation of towns, cities, and dungeons, where you click and point as soon as they become available. The developers didn't even bother programming the overworld map because most likely all of the production budget went to the FMV cutscenes. The gameplay is virtually the same as the PS1 game, but only with PS2 rendered 3D graphics. When you are inside a town or in a dungeon, you control Alicia by moving left and right. You jump over cliffs, bridges, and all sorts of platforms to advance. You can see enemies walking, crawling, or flying on the screen, so it is up to Alicia to fight or flee or freeze the enemy. By pressing the square button, Alicia can shoot photon rays to temporarily crystallize the enemy. Once they are crystallized, Alicia can use them as platforms to jump over higher or further platforms to advance. Speaking of which, there are items scattered all over the dungeon map that they will not be readily visible on the screen. Some items are placed on hard-to-reach places that it will take a lot of practice, skill, patience, and luck just to get 100% of the items on each map. Let me tell ya, as a completionist, doing all sorts of jumps just to get them all can be very frustrating to pull off. Often I find myself spending more time trying to get an item than actually finishing the dungeon itself. In the PS1 game, the difficulty of these puzzle jumps were tricky but not impossible to do. Here, the game developers became more sadistic with the difficulty in getting some of the items. You might need to see some videos of other people doing these insane Spider-Man jumps. The player has the opportunity to mismatch a combination of fighters or Einherjar, as Alicia finds more mortal souls scattered all over the world. This is a contrast to the PS1 game where you can scan for each soul. In this game, there is a good chance that you might fail to notice them before you can add them to the party. As you encounter the enemies, you can have up to 4 fighters on screen. Each character is controlled by the square, triangle, circle, and X buttons. There is an action meter at the bottom of the screen that limits the player's movement. Unlike the static turn-based system of the PS1 game, here, the characters have the liberty to move around across the battlefield. When you get close enough to the enemy, the turn-based attack is now possible. Depending on the equipment, each fighter can attack up to 3 times. By pressing the right buttons at the right time, the player can maximize the action meter to deal the most damage to an enemy by executing their individual finishing strikes. If there is one thing to complain about fighting these enemies, are the scenarios where you fight them in. Your characters are basically all melee fighters against some of the enemies that can reach you from afar. The player can see the trajectory of the enemies, yes, so it is easy to avoid being hit by dashing out of range. That being said, all characters must be successful on dodging. If the terrain is not flat or in a equal footing with the enemy, chances are some characters will be left behind and will be targeted by closing enemies. Another criticism that this game gets is the complicated skill system, a far cry change from the PS1 game. Equipment and accessories have their own special effects engraved to them that adds to the battle potential of the party. By getting all sorts of equipment and accessories from dungeons, shops, and enemies, the player can mismatch these items with the same colors and symbols being required to unlock a specific skill. The skills themselves are not easily learned just like that. Each time you vanquish your enemies, you will get some skill points, but you must unlock the skill you want to learn first before you go grinding away. There are also items called seal stones that you can collect, each one with a specific effect that can either give you or the enemy a handicap, like more experience, money, and stats. You will be needing a shitload of crystal points by defeating enemies in order to acquire them. Speaking of grinding, the post-battle rewards in this game are very stingy. After a battle, you will get a certain amount of experience, money, crystal points, and skill points, depending on what is your average party level, how many of your characters are left alive, and how efficient the battle went. It seems that the developers of this game envisioned to create a very challenging experience, even harder than the first, and in a way they succeeded. Because of the need of excessive grinding, a complicated skill system, and other increasingly frustrating aspects of the game, some players even resorted in using cheat codes to make things easier. But even the developers foresaw this event and made countermeasures for it. To this day, it is one of the Jho-RPGs out there that has a cheat code protection program into it. If one is not very careful in using the right cheat codes, the protection will trigger once you reach Chapter 4, and it will corrupt all of your Valkyrie Profile 2 game saves inside the memory card. meaning it is advisable to have a backup memory card that has your VP2 game saves where you have not activated any of the cheat codes yet. Over the years, game hackers were able to bypass the protection and submitted their own game saves where it is safe to advance on Chapter 4. I have a love-hate experience of this game, but only because of the major nitpicks that I mentioned. But despite of all that, Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria is still a solid entertaining game. It can be very tedious, yes, at times, but I like to believe that this game is specifically made for true hardcore Jho-RPG fans who want to escape the normalcy of the traditional turn-based role-playing games out there. Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria gets an 8.5 out of 10. If you like this video, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more gaming content. Until next time, bye bye.
I won't return to Valhalla!